The moment I saw the cake, I understood everything. It sat in the center of my son's dining room table, 3 tiers tall, wrapped in ivory fondant with gold lettering that curled across the front in careful cursive. The candles were already arranged, 38 of them, and the name written beneath the roses was not mine. It was Vanessa's. My daughter-in-law's birthday fell 4 days before mine, and somehow, without anyone mentioning it to me, the two occasions had been folded together into one evening. An evening that, from the look of the room, the catered appetizers, the string lights my son had wound around the back porch railing, the flower arrangements I had never seen before in a house I had helped furnish, was very clearly not about me at all. I was 67 years old that Saturday evening in March. I had driven 4 hours from Savannah to Atlanta through light rain and road construction, following the directions my son had texted me that morning, arriving at the exact time he had asked me to arrive. 6 o'clock. "Dress nicely, Mom," he had added at the end. "We're making it a real celebration." I had worn my good blue dress, the one I kept for occasions that mattered. My daughter-in-law opened the front door before I could knock. She was dressed beautifully, dark hair pinned up, a silk blouse the color of champagne, and she smiled the way she always smiled at me, bright and brief, like a camera flash. "Margaret," she said, "you made it. Come in, let me take your coat." She did not ask about my drive. She turned before I could answer and disappeared toward the kitchen, calling over her shoulder that the others were on the patio. The others. I did not know there were others. I stood in the entryway of my son's house and counted 14 guests seated at a long table on the back porch. People I recognized vaguely from his office, from Vanessa's book club, from a neighborhood I had never lived in. My son appeared from the crowd with a beer in hand and gave me a one-armed hug. "Mom, good, you're here. Grab a seat. Dinner starts in a few minutes." He pointed toward the far end of the table, near the corner where the porch railing met the house, where a single chair sat apart from the main gathering, not quite pulled in, not quite part of the conversation. A folding chair. Padded, but narrow. Slightly lower than the rest. I sat in it without saying anything. The seat of honor at my birthday dinner. What arrived in front of me 40 minutes later was a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables, the same as everyone else. At least there was that. But when the cake emerged from the kitchen, and my son stood to make the toast, he raised his glass first to Vanessa, to her brilliance, to the life they were building, to everything she meant to him. Then he turned and added, almost as an afterthought, "And of course, we also want to wish Mom a happy birthday. She's 67 this week." Everyone smiled politely. Someone said, "How wonderful," and then the conversation moved on. My granddaughter Sophie found me in the kitchen 20 minutes later while I was rinsing my own plate. She was 15, thin-shouldered with her father's eyes, and she looked at me with an expression I had learned to recognize in her over the years. A kind of quiet sorrow she was too young to fully name. "Grandma," she said softly, "I told Dad we should have made it your night. He said there would be time for a separate dinner later." I nodded and told her the chicken was very good. She hugged me longer than she needed to, and I let her. And I tried not to let the weight of it press me down. I drove home through the dark that night, on the same roads I had come up on, passing the same rest stops, the same orange construction barrels, the same stretches of pine forest along I-16. The rain had stopped. The roads were dry and empty at that hour, and the quiet inside my car felt different from the quiet of the porch where I had sat apart from everything. That quiet had been exclusion. This one was mine. My name is Margaret Elaine Fowler. I am a retired, registered nurse. I worked for 31 years at Memorial Health in Savannah, night shifts and holidays and the kind of long stretches that age a person faster than they should. When my husband Raymond died of a stroke 9 years ago, I kept working 2 more years simply because the routine was the thing holding me upright. When I finally retired at 63, I had a paid-off house, a pension, savings that had taken decades of careful living to build, and a son I believed I had raised to understand the value of both hard work and kindness. I had been wrong about at least one of those things. It began slowly, the way these things always do. After Raymond passed, Thomas called more frequently, which felt like love at first. Then the calls started arriving alongside requests. His small business had hit a rough patch. Could I help with just 1 month's operating costs? His car needed repairs he hadn't budgeted for. Could I spot him until the next invoice cleared? Then Vanessa was pregnant with Sophie, and there was a house they wanted to put an offer on, a good neighborhood, good schools, and they were just barely short on the down payment. Just barely short. I wrote the check. I told myself it was an investment in my grandchild's future, which was true enough that I believed it for a while. After that, the requests became assumptions. Thomas mentioned once that it was easier if he just had access to my secondary savings account for real emergencies. And I added his name to it because I trusted him and because I was still learning, at 62, that trust extended without conditions is not love. It is an open door. The tuition for Sophie's private school. The landscaping repairs after a storm tore through their backyard. The kitchen renovation Vanessa had wanted since they moved in. The trip to Cabo they called a necessary break. The new car when Vanessa's lease ended. Each time, Thomas framed it carefully. Not a request. A conversation. You know we're good for it, Mom. We'll pay you back when things stabilize. Things never quite stabilized. I estimated, sitting at my kitchen table that Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and the paper bank statements I still received by mail out of habit, that over the past 4 years I had given or lent, a distinction I no longer found meaningful, somewhere close to $78,000 to my son and his wife. I had never written any of it down in a formal way. Raymond used to say a handshake was worth more than a contract between family. Raymond was a generous man. He was also wrong about that. I spread the statements across the table and began tracing the withdrawals from the secondary account Thomas had access to. Small amounts, never more than $800 at a time, spaced weeks apart so they wouldn't stand out. Over the past 20 months, they totaled $26,000, not emergencies. Patterns. I recognized patterns from 30 years of reading patient charts. This was not crisis management. This was routine. I put the statements back in order, returned them to their envelopes, and placed them in the fireproof file box I kept in the hall closet. Then I made a second cup of coffee and sat by the window looking out at my backyard. At the camellias Raymond had planted along the fence, the spring, before he got sick. They were blooming now, pink and white, unhurried by anything happening inside the house. I had a decision to make, not whether to act. That part had already settled itself somewhere in the drive home from Atlanta, in the dark between the highway lights. The question was, how? Monday morning, I was at First Community Bank on Drayton Street before 9. I asked for Patricia Simmons, the branch manager I had known since she was a junior teller years ago. She welcomed me into her office with the kind of warmth that comes from genuine history rather than professional courtesy. "Margaret," she said, "what can I do for you today?" I set my file box on the chair beside me and opened it. "I need to make some changes to all of my accounts," I said. "Immediate changes." She listened without interrupting as I walked her through what I had found. When I finished, she pulled my account records up on her screen and was quiet for a moment. I watched her expression shift from warm to careful, the way a person's face changes when they are deciding how much to say. "Margaret," she said finally, "there's something else you should know." She turned the monitor slightly toward me. "In addition to the withdrawals you identified, someone accessed this account online 6 days ago and changed the linked email address." I felt the blood leave my face. "Whose email is it now?" She read me an address I didn't recognize, a name I didn't recognize. But the timing I recognized perfectly. 6 days ago was the Monday after my birthday dinner in Atlanta. Remove his name from everything, I said. She nodded. I'll take care of it right now. She typed steadily for several minutes, asking me to verify my identity at each step, walking me through new security protocols. While she worked, she mentioned quietly, without quite looking at me, that she had seen situations like this before. More than people realized. I thanked her for saying so, without making it into more than it was. Before I left, she printed a confirmation of every change and handed me the stack. This is all effective immediately, she said. If anyone attempts to access these accounts, they'll be declined, and you'll be notified. I drove from the bank to the office of Warren Ellison, the estate attorney who had handled Raymond's will and who I had not spoken to since. His assistant fit me in at 11:30, and when I sat down across from Warren's desk, I told him the same things I had told Patricia, starting with the birthday dinner and ending with the changed email address. He was a quiet man, methodical in the way that good lawyers are, and he listened with his hands folded and his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was still for a moment. Then he said, "Margaret, I have to tell you something, and I want you to hear it without alarming you, because it is something we can address entirely." He opened a drawer and retrieved a folder. He placed it on the desk between us. 3 weeks ago, I received an inquiry from your son's attorney. It was exploratory, he said, asking general questions about the process of establishing a medical power of attorney for a parent who might be showing signs of cognitive decline. The room went quiet in a particular way. I had worked in medicine long enough to know what cognitive decline proceedings could mean. Who initiated the inquiry? I asked. His attorney said it was your son. But I want to be clear. Nothing has been filed. This was preliminary. They were testing the ground. I looked at my hands in my lap. Raymond had given me these rings, one in 1979 and one on our 20th anniversary. I had never taken them off. I was not showing signs of cognitive decline. I had driven to Atlanta and back in the rain. I had read bank statements and identified a pattern across 20 months. I had walked into a bank and an attorney's office in the same morning and made clear, precise, legally sound decisions. I would like to revise my will, I said. Today, if possible. Warren nodded. Of course. Tell me what you want to do. I removed Thomas and Vanessa as beneficiaries entirely. My house, my pension, my investments, my savings. Everything would go into a trust for Sophie, to be managed by an independent trustee until she turned 25. I also asked Warren to send a formal letter to Thomas's attorney on my behalf, notifying them that any further inquiries regarding my competency would be met with immediate legal action and a formal complaint to the state bar. Warren drafted it while I sat there. It was 2 paragraphs. It was enough. I was home by 2 in the afternoon. I changed out of my good clothes, put on the house dress I wore in the garden, and went out to deadhead the camellias along the fence. The afternoon was warm, the kind of Georgia warmth that arrives in March and feels like a promise. I worked along the fence slowly, clipping the spent blooms, and I thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of relief. My phone began ringing at 4:13. Thomas. Mom, my card was declined at the gas station. Something's wrong with the account. I did not answer. Thomas again, 4 minutes later. Mom, call me back. This is serious. I'm in the middle of something. Then Vanessa, her voice clipped and cold even through voicemail. Margaret, something seems to have happened with the accounts. We need to resolve this today. Please call Thomas. Then Thomas again. Mom, I tried to check the balance online and I'm locked out. What's going on? Is everything okay? I set the phone on the porch railing and went back to the camellias. I had 3 more bushes to finish before the light changed. By 6 o'clock, There were 11 missed calls and a series of text messages escalating from confused to irritated to something that felt very much like threat, though worded carefully enough to maintain deniability. "We are coming down this weekend to sort this out. We need to sit down as a family. You cannot just make changes without discussing them with us first." I read each message once. I did not respond to any of them. The call I answered came at 8:17 that evening, from a number I knew by heart. "Grandma?" Sophie's voice came through small and uncertain. "Are you okay?" I told her I was fine and asked how she was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Grandma, I need to tell you something, and I'm scared to," but her voice was barely above a whisper. "I heard them talking last night after dinner. I wasn't trying to listen. I was coming downstairs for water and I heard them in the kitchen. Mom was saying that if you wouldn't sign things voluntarily, Dad knew a doctor who could do an evaluation and write a report saying you weren't capable of managing your own affairs. She said it would be the cleanest way to get access to everything before you had time to change anything." I sat down slowly in the armchair by the telephone table, the one Raymond used to sit in when he read the paper. I kept my voice even. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "You did the right thing." "Do you think they'd really do that?" she asked. "I want you to know something, Sophie," I said. "I am not angry with you for any of this. None of it is your responsibility. Do you understand?" She said yes, though she sounded less certain than I would have liked. I told her I loved her and that I would talk to her soon. After I hung up, I sat in Raymond's chair for a long time without moving. The house settled around me the way old houses do at night, small creaks and sighs, the refrigerator cycling, the wind against the kitchen window. I had been a nurse. I had sat with people in their worst moments and helped them stay calm and make decisions when panic would have been easier. I tried to offer myself the same thing now. By the time Thomas's SUV pulled into my driveway Friday afternoon, I had spoken to Warren twice more. To my own doctor to document a current clean bill of health in writing, and to the detective division of the Savannah Chatham Police Department, where a woman named Officer Hollins had listened to my account of the changed account credentials and opened a non-emergency case file in case I needed it later. I watched from the window as Thomas and Vanessa got out of the car. My son walked with his shoulders tight, the way he walked when he was preparing for an argument. Vanessa moved beside him, controlled and purposeful, her mouth already set into a thin line. She had worn heels to come speak to her 67-year-old mother-in-law in that mother-in-law's house, which told me everything I needed to know about how she had decided to frame this conversation. I opened the door before they knocked. Thomas's face cycled through several expressions before settling on something meant to look like concern. "Mom, thank God. Are you all right? We've been so worried." I stepped aside to let them in and said nothing. They came into the living room. I did not offer them anything to drink. I sat in my chair, and they stood for a moment, looking at me the way people look when they expected a different reception. Finally, Thomas sat on the couch. Vanessa remained standing. She started first. "Margaret, I don't know what you think has been happening, but whatever it is, you've made decisions without talking to anyone, and it's caused enormous disruption. Thomas's business accounts are connected to that card. He missed a supplier payment because of you this week. Because of me," I said. "That's not quite what I meant," Thomas said quickly, shooting a look at Vanessa that she ignored. "All I'm saying," she continued, "is that these things should have been discussed as a family." I looked at her steadily. "Which family discussions were you referring to? Were you perhaps thinking of the one about the $26,000 withdrawn from my savings account in small increments over 20 months? Or the conversation about the power of attorney inquiry your husband sent to my attorney without mentioning a word of it to me? Or perhaps the medical evaluation plan you discussed in your kitchen last week?" Vanessa's face changed. Thomas stood up. Mom, that's not. Sophie wasn't supposed to. He stopped himself. Sophie told the truth, I said simply. That's what I raised you to do as well. Though somewhere it seems that lesson didn't hold. We were protecting you, Vanessa said, and her voice had shifted, quieter now, recalibrating. You are alone, Margaret. You are 67 years old. You live in this house by yourself, and you have no one to make decisions for you if something happens. We were thinking about your future. You were thinking about my house, I said. The room was very quiet. You were thinking about what would happen to my pension and my investments and the property my husband and I spent 30 years paying off. And you were thinking about how to access those things with the least inconvenience. I want you to hear me say that clearly, because I want to make sure we are not pretending otherwise in this room. Thomas sat back down. He looked at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was different from before, lower, and without the careful, rehearsed quality it had carried since he walked in. Mom, I'm sorry. Vanessa glanced at him sharply. I mean it, he said. I don't expect you to believe it right now, but I need to say it. What I did with the account, what I let happen, it was wrong. I told myself I was managing things, that you had more than you needed and wouldn't notice, but that's not an excuse. I knew what I was doing. Vanessa said his name. One sharp syllable. He did not look at her. I'm not going to stand here and defend the indefensible. Vanessa? His voice was quiet but certain. Mom deserves better than that. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, a mockingbird was working through its repertoire in the magnolia tree at the side of the house. The sound came through the window, clear and undisturbed. I want you both to leave now, I said. We can talk again when you've had time to think clearly. Thomas, I will always be your mother. What happens next between us depends entirely on what you choose to do going forward. Vanessa walked to the door without another word. Thomas followed, then stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back to look at me. I want to make this right, he said. Then start with honesty. I told him. Whatever else you do, start there. He left. I heard the car reverse out of the driveway and the sound of it fading down the street until the neighborhood was quiet again. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that, because triumph is not the right word for what I felt. What I felt was closer to the feeling of setting down a load you have carried so long you forgot what your hands were for. A release, an ache where the weight had been, and underneath it, something steady. I ate supper alone. Soup I had made earlier in the week and left in the refrigerator. I sat at my kitchen table where Raymond and I had eaten 10,000 meals, and I watched the light change outside the window, the day ending in long, pale streaks across the yard. I was in bed by 9 and asleep almost immediately, which surprised me. I had expected to lie awake, turning it all over, but my body understood something my mind was still catching up to, that the hard part was behind me, and what was ahead was mine to shape as I chose. Morning arrived with birdsong and thin spring light coming through the curtains. I lay still for a few minutes, listening to the neighborhood. A lawnmower somewhere 2 blocks over, the garbage truck making its rounds. Small, ordinary sounds of a day with no crisis in it. I made coffee and sat at the table. My phone was face down on the counter where I had left it. I picked it up and saw the messages. Sophie had written at 7:12. Good morning, Grandma. I hope you slept. I'm really sorry about everything. I love you so much. I wrote back. I love you more than you know. None of this is your burden to carry. You did a brave thing, she replied within seconds. The second message was from Thomas. It had come in at 11:40 the night before, after I was asleep. Mom, I drove around for a long time tonight. I've been trying to figure out what to say that doesn't sound like an excuse. I keep coming back to the same thing. I got so used to leaning on you that I stopped seeing you. I stopped seeing what it was costing you. I saw an account balance and a credit limit and forgot there was a person behind them. Your person. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking for the chance to be someone worth forgiving. I love you. I'm sorry. I read it twice. I set the phone on the table. I poured more coffee. I thought about what it means to love someone who has hurt you. Not the sentimental version of that, not the version that papers over damage with pretty words, but the real and difficult version, the one that requires you to hold two things at once, that someone can be capable of genuine wrong and also capable of genuine change, and that you can love them and still protect yourself, that these things do not cancel each other out. I would not be rushed. That was the thing I had given away most often over the years. My own pace, my own timing, hurried along by someone else's urgency. Not anymore. I wrote back to Thomas at 8:30 in the morning, after I had finished my coffee and washed the cup and stood for a while in the backyard looking at the camellias. Thomas, I read your message. I believe you mean what you've written. That is a beginning, not an ending. There is a great deal of ground to cover and it will take time. More time than either of us might want. What I need from you right now is not promises. It's patience. With me and with the process. I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you. We'll find our way back to something true if we're both willing to do the work. Love, Mom. I put the phone in my pocket and went back inside to get my garden gloves. The morning was warm already. The kind of Georgia spring morning that reminds you why people choose to live here. The air soft and green-smelling, the light not yet harsh, the world still carrying some of the night's quiet. I worked along the fence row for an hour, tending what was there, removing what had died, making room for what was coming. At some point, Sophie called, and I answered, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing urgent. School. A book she was reading, a friend who had said something unkind, and what Sophie thought the right response might be. I listened and asked questions, and felt the particular pleasure of being useful in a way that cost me nothing, that in fact gave me something back. When we hung up, I stood at the corner of my yard where Raymond had built a wooden bench that had grayed beautifully over the years. I sat on it. The camellias moved slightly in a breeze I could barely feel. A cardinal came and went from the bird bath. The morning continued in its unhurried way. For a long time I had believed that love required endless accommodation, that saying yes was generosity and saying no was selfishness, that holding your boundary meant closing your heart. I had believed this so deeply and for so long that I had not noticed when it stopped being a philosophy and became a pattern of erosion, a self quietly disappearing, piece by piece, into other people's needs. I understood now that the most loving thing I had ever done for my son was not the down payment, not the tuition, not the $26,000 quietly taken and never returned. It was this, the refusal to disappear any further. The willingness to be seen clearly, to stand plainly in my own life, to say this is mine and it matters and I am still here. That is what I had given him. Not money. A mother who was still real. The morning stretched out in front of me, open and unhurried. I had nowhere to be, and nothing owed, and all the time I needed to decide what to do with it. There was something extraordinary in that, something I had not allowed myself to feel in so long that it took a moment to name it. It was peace, unearned by anyone else, unrequired by anyone else. Just mine. The most ordinary thing in the world, and the one I had worked hardest to reclaim. I sat on Raymond's bench in the morning sun for a little longer, and then I went inside and started breakfast, and the day began the way days are supposed to begin, quietly and on my own terms. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever given so much of yourself to someone you loved that you forgot what was left for you? And what did it take before you finally came back to yourself? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this one touched something in you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today.